I wanted to talk about sodium channel, cardiac sodium channel screening, and really take a look at where it came from over the past 10 or 15 years, and should we be doing more. I am director and co-founder of a company, Apconics, where we have an ion channel lab, and this is the kind of work we do day in, day out. So sodium channel screening, the agenda for the next 20 plus minutes is really, I just want to take you through a history, focusing on what I think have been some really important papers in the field. For those papers that I don't cite, I hope I'm not upsetting any authors, but I do believe in sort of 3 or 4 papers that I picked today has really illustrated some seminal work in the field, starting with Alex Harmer at AstraZeneca, which sort of started the ball rolling on routine high throughput sodium channel screening. More recently through the SIPA paradigm, and how that changed the way we look at a number of cardiac ion channels, including hNaV1.5. There's been an interesting and stark awareness of variability in potency data for all ion channels, particularly hNaV1.5, and I want to take a look at that. And then more recently, a focus on other kinetic parameters, and one which I'm going to call recovery from block, and I'm going to explain these terms to you. The presentation itself, there isn't a lot of new data here per se. These are somewhat my perspectives on the history of sodium channel screening and where it is at and whether we want more. The opinions are my own, and I would very much welcome feedback. I've given my email address already. More than happy to share these slides if that's appropriate, and my email address will also appear at the end. The presentation today is limited to electrophysiology, to patch clamp consideration of sodium channel screening. I'm not going to get into microelectrode array or voltage sensitive dyes, excepting they have a hugely important part to play, but I do want to focus just on patch clamp today, both manual and automated. And in simplest terms, the cell reagents that I'm really reporting on today are standard recombinant, stably expressing cell lines. Of course, primary cells increasingly have relevance, as do the human iPSCs, and other presenters will discuss those. So really, my presentation day is hardcore, high throughput patch clamp screening. So I imagine everyone on the call is familiar with sodium channels, and particularly the cardiac sodium channel. So I don't want to labor an introduction. It is an enormous protein of 4 very similar domains. This comprises a large alpha subunit that will interact with a variety of smaller beta subunits in the plasma membrane. It's an ion channel in that it conducts a large influx of sodium, and this results in the action potential upstroke of each cardiac action potential, and it's critical to that, both in the atria and ventricle. Significantly, block of this channel, and this could be a mutation or of significance to this presentation, drug induced. will manifest in the ECG as QRS prolongation and a series of conduction defects that are an adverse effect and thus should be avoided. Mutationally, dysfunction is associated with arrhythmias, long QT, Brugada, and sudden cardiac arrest. So this is a significant physiologically important ion channel. So to the first, what I consider, really seminal paper in the field, I had the pleasure of working with Alex Harmer at AstraZeneca, and this, this dates back, 14 or 15 years now, when we were in the sort of first generation of automated patch clamp, and that was a beautifully simple machine called Ironworks. If you've never had the pleasure of working on an Ironworks machine, it is elegantly simple. Later generations of Syncropatch and Cube can do so much more than the Ironworks, but it had a simplicity, and certainly for voltage gated platforms, it was absolutely absolutely fit for purpose. And Harmer et al. Used again an elegant 8-pulse protocol where the channel cycles through closed, open, inactivated 8 times, and that depolarization is applied at approximately 3 Hertz from holding potential of -90. And there's a very simple graphic there just to illustrate this repeat opening, inactivation, closing of the channel. So this P8 protocol, and the idea there is that peak sodium channel current would be measured at each of those depolarizations. At P1, at pulse 1, this gives some measure of resting or tonic block of the channel when it is first exposed to drug and then opened. But subsequently and hugely importantly, by P8, the channel has cycled through a number of open, inactivated, closed states, and has been used. It has been repeatedly used as it is physiologically with every heartbeat. And so we get a feel by P8 for something called a use dependence block. Typically more compounds where they show use dependence, this is more potent at pulse 8 than it would be at pulse 1. Typical example there would be tetracaine, where there's maybe a 10-fold shift in potency, but this use dependence is a critically important biophysical characteristic of all sodium channels, and no less so in the heart. And so this protocol gives us a measure of use dependence. Harmer, in similarly to how a safety margin had been calculated for HERG, another important cardiac channel, Harmer managed to establish a provisional safety margin of 30 to 100-fold of the IC50 at pulse 8 versus free Cmax. So in a pharmaceutical sense, we get a feel for a safety margin, and this is incredibly useful to projects. One of my favorite sentences from this paper, and I think could be applied and should be applied to every paper, in safety pharmacology and toxicology, was the recognition that screening out any liability early in discovery, and they're alluding here to a medicinal chemistry design make test cycle to remove any liability while there is still chemistry options, that this screening out of any liability is the simplest route to reduce safety issues. And I think that's hugely valid for consideration of any ion channel in a toxicology safety setting. Interestingly, and again, sodium, the cardiac sodium channel shares something here with HERG, that changes in QRS occur at 15-fold less free Cmax than the IC50. That less than 10% inhibition of this channel can cause QRS prolongation. Within 2 or 3 years, Kramer, and it's not the first time I'll mention Jim today, generated a paper with the with MICE acronym, which is multiple ion channel effects, really stating that in trying to predict torsade de pointes, a fatal arrhythmia, from hERG alone, was difficult, and the predictivity was increased when considering cardiac sodium channel and cardiac calcium channel for that matter. So this is our starting point for sodium channel screening. It was the first pass at high throughput screening on automated platforms, a use dependent protocol, and still certainly a favorite, of mine today. And this is where everything started. But so question, should we be doing more? Along came the SIPR initiative, maybe around about sort of 2013, 2015, people started talking about considering more cardiac ion channels, that hERG wasn't the only important channel, and that activities at hERG could be offset by other ion channels. And far from and so this then focused increasing efforts at other channels, including hNaV1.5. And what became a favorite within the SIPR paradigm was not the peak or the early sodium channel current. It was this small residual current after the majority of the channel has inactivated. Highlighted in red here, this small residual current that in fact, when you measure area under the curve, actually conducts quite a lot of sodium. And so it has quite a significant effect on the action potential morphology. The voltage protocol used on automated patch clamp or patch clamp platforms changed significantly as well, and this became a best practice from the ICH Q&A guidelines, where the action potential elicited now far from a jagged tooth P8 protocol became something that looked like a cardiac action potential with an upstroke where peak current would be measured, a plateau, which contributed by late sodium channel and calcium channel for that matter, and then a repolarizing ramp where hERG could be recorded, but particularly the late current can be recorded as well. Now, the late sodium channel current is by its nature small, tiny, in fact, very difficult. I've seen it done. Nanian have presented on this, but it's small, only really barely above background, in fairness. So globally, efforts were designed to increase the size of this late sodium channel current, and this has either been by addition of either ATX, a C-enemy toxin, or veratridine, both agonists, which by different mechanisms increase the size of the late sodium channel current. So then effectively we're dealing with a ligand gated channel, and of course this introduces variability in how this current is opened, concentrations of these ligands, and it's certainly been shown that potencies subsequently of blockers vary depending on the agonist there, ATX or veratridine. So ATX within the SIPR paradigm certainly became the preferred agonist of choice. So much so that then ensued a world shortage of ATX because everybody suddenly had to purchase some. Another way around this that's certainly found favor is a mutation, which the delta KPQ, that by mutation naturally increases the size of the late sodium current. And again, certainly other CRO friends have work with this kind of channel. So you are faced with, do you want the assay to run with a ligand gated channel or a mutant? So important considerations there, but certainly an increased focus on the late current, maybe in preference to the to peak. I believe it's fairly safe to say that very few compounds show much, if any, selectivity towards the late current rather than peak. People will be screaming ranolazine at the screen as I talk. It's a modest selectivity. In my experience, not many other compounds show this sort of level of selectivity. So should we be screening late current, or is peak or early current a reasonable proxy for that? One, the SIPA paradigm and the best practice protocol, bearing in mind this action potential, voltage protocol would be used at point 0.2 or 0.1 hertz, every 5 or 10 seconds. We are losing what I believe to be a very important use dependence, measurement here, which I do believe we are losing something in not doing that. I'd welcome your thoughts and feedback on that, of course. I promise. So we've had a very fit for purpose P8 protocol. SIPA changed that in best practice to an action potential like protocol. But what has always been known, I think, within the field of electrophysiology is that with different voltage protocols, with different experimental setups, we are terrible. I say we, all electrophysiologists, we all have our own little, secret settings. And even despite the SIPA attempts to standardize, solutions, voltage protocols, etc., etc., what you see there is a figure taken from a Kramer. I promised mentioning Jim again, a Kramer et al. Paper, and this is a fantastic paper, which considers variability in hErg assays, in sodium channel assays, and this is the variability in peak sodium channel currents across 19 different groups. These would be CRO, pharma, using different platforms, different providers, different groups, different labs, different geographies, different platforms. And as you can see, there is a huge difference in orders of magnitude for what are very standard, well-characterized reference compounds. The example there I particularly cite is mexillatine, a relatively uncomplicated sodium channel blocker, use dependent, where IC50s, across different users ranges from 0.3 to, greater than 100 micromolar, a staggering variability in what was, effectively a reasonably standardized assay. And yeah, the field continues to battle this. We can't blame it all on automated platforms, of course not, nor should we. I'm a big fan of automated patch clamp. There was some comfort or discomfort equally in an SPS poster, I believe San Diego 2024 from the FDA et al., where again in the variability in peak current measurement, and this is manual patch at 37, i.e. gold standard conditions, peak variability was at least 8.5 fold for the compounds, reference compounds that were tested, and late current variability was, greater than 10-fold difference. And this is not unique to the cardiac sodium channel. This is, equal, there were similar posters, variability on hErg and calcium channel, etc. So, really, really interesting considerations in fairness for the field to battle with, and when we do more, to be aware of. Two small subjects I just wanted to touch on, and to be again maybe a little bit contentious, and I in no way am berating urethins or or CEREP in any way. I'm just this is just an interesting facet that we're talking about electrophysiology, and equally we will see, and the stakeholders of our data will be dealing also with binding assay data, where using radioligand displacement assays. These are incredibly common. CEREP became a household name on the back of this. But there are caveats here, where simply this is these are, whereas most of what we do in the laboratory, I'm sure every user is using human isoform of the channel. These binding assays, as published on CEREP, are using rat tissue. And really, we're measuring the displacement of a single radiolabeled ligand, from a single site, and this is site 2 in the sodium channel alpha subunit. There are 5 different sites, all with their own pharmacology. So these assays cannot possibly capture all relevant, pharmacology. So to be contentious, how good are these assays? And given relatively inexpensive, high throughput functional electrophysiology, why are we using them? I think it's a relevant question. Also, consideration of another cardiac sodium channel, sodium channel 1.8. We're more used to talking about 1.8 in relation to peripheral nervous system, DRGs, but it is undoubtedly expressed in the heart. And I reviewed a manuscript relatively recently, which in identifying compounds causing QRS conduction abnormalities, found value where there was no hNaV1.5 liability. They identified that in some cases there was a hNaV1.8 liability. I thought this paper this manuscript was fascinating. I've yet to see it actually published, but I hope it is, and maybe something to consider in the spirit of doing more. So the final topic for discussion today is beyond this simple measurement. I say simple, of an IC50, of a measurable potency, or even beyond, I guess, use dependence in some way. And this is a measure of a reversibility of use dependent block and recovery from it. In this sense, there is a kinetic classification of drugs according to a Vaughan-Williams classification, and Khurram Chaudhry is a key key leader in this field, with some seminal papers and really good reads, and where drugs which show use dependence, when they rapidly dissociate from use dependent block, mexiletine is an example, that is considered safe. They will be classified class 1B according to this classification, but that rapid dissociation is safe. It blocks, but it rapidly unblocks, if you like. Where this dissociation is slower, where there is a more immediate or a slow dissociation, quinidine and flecainide, for instance, these drugs are more unsafe and more likely to cause arrhythmia and conduction abnormalities. That is because there is then an accumulation of use-dependent block. So it is now becoming increasingly important to measure this recovery from block, and what you are actually measuring is the off-rate time constant. It is considered wonderfully in a paper by Lee et al. That describes it beautifully. The reason to mention it today is because the FDA, in IND submissions or regulatory submissions for any sodium channel blockers, are requesting this kind of work now. They have developed their own protocols based on manual patch clamp at physiological temperature, which, I smile when I say this, are wonderfully complex. Typically manual patch with, the addition of drug, the establishment of a stable use-dependent block over 200 pulses, and then for the 201st pulse, a gap is introduced where the drug, depending on its nature, will recover from block either rapidly or slowly, and this can be measured and fit to a curve, and the off rate measured. This is data from our own laboratory. We have done a few of these studies, and I hope, without too much explanation, what we've managed to do is translate that manual patch voltage protocol, which 200 pulses and then a 50-second wait time. You can imagine how long that takes in a manual patch setting. We've had to make a few modifications on an automated platform, but I think have done so very successfully. And this data shows, you can see from at 0 time, there is some measure of use-dependent block, and then subsequently over the course of 1s and 10s and 50-second, a recovery from that block as use dependence is removed. Mexillatine, you can see, without really, just by eye, that was a very rapid recovery from block. Quinidine was slower. Flecainide, slow. And this this data agrees very well with the literature. These studies are performed at near physiological temperature, and the drug is in its first instance applied at an approximate IC50. So I'm nearing the end of my presentation now, and one final consideration, which I think and hopefully and really brings it was a beautifully timed request from Nanian for me to join and speak today, was that the very content of this presentation about screening, what we do, what do we need to do more of, and how is it going to develop, is now the subject of a HESI working group, a conduction working group led by the ever capable Jen Pearson, and it's early days. There have only been a few meetings so far, but there are stakeholders from industry, academia, CRO, equipment manufacturers, etc. So very akin to the the SIPA working groups, and the intention is to look at all things sodium channel and conduction, both in an in silico setting, in an in vitro setting, more in vitro complex models, cardiomyocyte, all of the above, all is in scope. To really address the question I've asked today, where we started and on what more should we be doing, and all of this will include how should these assays be run, compound sets for validation, very critical to get right, the reagents, cell reagents, etc. So early days, and of course it will take time, but very, very relevant, and today's presentation has given you a flavor for that. My thanks, as always, to my wonderful lab team. My email address is there, and I would certainly love to hear from you. And thank you all for the invitation and for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. This was really, really interesting and amazing what you could do from the hallway. Thank you for joining.
No introductions, no no football team coming in and wanting to drink. No, it went rather well. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I have a few questions now lined up for you. So from Torsten, is variability in the hNaV1.5 screening larger than in assays using upstroke velocity?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a straight answer for you. What I will say is that, I would assume, I'm assuming, that measurement of upstroke velocity will be variable, and I imagine quite variable. I saw your presentation, Torsten, and the variability in the shapes of the action potential, etc. So you translate that into labs around the world. I would imagine, and this is versus, the measurement of a sodium channel is very simple, really far simpler than, a measurement in a cardiomyocyte of an action potential. So, I imagine there will be significant variability in both assays. To be fair, it's a surprise to me how variable electrophysiology assays are. And it's something the field scratches its head with.
You just stole my question, because I wanted to ask you about, if you now have any theories about it, or what is your opinion about the sources of this variability, because we heard also from Torsten a similar story. And maybe any comments about the temperature? I mean, you mentioned temperatures as well.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's much discussion about temperature. Technically, it is easier, in a high throughput screening mode to be testing at ambient, rather than near physiological. That across different labs, there will still be differences in compound prep, compound dilution, how sticky compounds are, how long, it's certainly in an automated patch clamp setting, how long these drugs are applied for. I know Nanian have done work on that, with HERG and, and Syncropatch, etc. Just, how long does it need to be applied for? So all of these variabilities, these variations in protocols, are obviously still contributing to variability. Some of it will, just come down to different machines, all of the above.
But did you ever try iPSC cells for these assays?
Yeah, I mean, so I have tried iPSC. There is still obviously more technically difficult. I know it can be done, and I know, Al George, for instance, has used these things on Syncropatch and done, screened millions, thousands of compounds, probably at great cost. They are an expensive reagent. I think the question, really that I'd love to ask there is, in doing that with an expensive cell reagent, what is the added value to doing that? What am I getting extra versus a recombinant cell line? And how do you even prove that value? What are you going to show that proves I'm going to spend £1,000 on those cells rather than €1? And I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, but I have, it is technically possible. These cells tend to have a lot of sodium current in them. It's can be done. Yeah, but for a routine screening, yeah, it's a question on value.
We have two more questions from the chat, and then I guess we could wrap it up and let you go to your conference. Do hNaV1.5 current IC50 values underestimate the cardiotoxic potential of sodium channel blockers? And what is the reason for the artificially high IC50 values for hNaV1.5 current blockers?
Yeah, that's all good questions. I mean, I guess, the first slide said that, there's a 15-fold difference between IC50 and where QRS prolongation starts to happen. It's a very similar story with HERG and QT prolongation happening really with a small percentage fraction of the IC50 and channel occupancy. It's that I guess we need to understand. I guess what saves the argument is to be aware of that, but it doesn't invalidate the safety margin, that if we have a free Cmax, you know, that 30-fold for hERG or that 30-fold to 100-fold, you know, you'd like it 100-fold, is still valid. That's been proven, that's been published, and, you know, has been reconsidered in the literature, and it's still around about 30-fold. So, you know, you know, regardless of a disconnect or a mistranslation, of course, that's important, but this safety margin stands. And I think, you know, is still valid.
And one more, I think, rather interesting question about the subunits. So, can different subunits and splice variants of the hNaV1.5 channel cause shifts in IC50 values and alter patch clamp measurement outcomes? So, is there a tighter definition of cell lines for hNaV screening?
Yeah, it's again, yeah, the English phrase is a can of worms. I'm not quite sure how that it's no, I mean so every electrophysiologist is, you know, is shouting at the screen now. So, you know, certainly beta subunits are known to possibly change expression, certainly change biophysics, and, you know, you know, V halves, and, you know, what's the current morphology. What I haven't seen is great evidence of pharmacology shifts. You know, I'd love to hear about that. I haven't seen great evidence of pharmacology shifts. And certainly, you know, not fully considered by the hESI working group yet, but certainly there's almost too much variability in beta subunits. Do we keep it simple with just an alpha consideration? You know, early days. Is there too much variability in too many options? So keep it simple. You know, if anyone has some pharmacology evidence, I'd love to be aware of that.